My name is Laura, and at 48, I thought I'd learned all there was to know about myself. 3 years ago, my world unraveled when Richard, my husband of 2 decades, walked out, leaving me with a half-empty house and a heart I wasn't sure could mend. I'd grown used to the quiet, to the way small-town eyes skimmed over me like I was just another fixture, unseen, unremarkable. I told myself I didn't need more than that. The ache for touch, for connection, for someone to see me, I buried it deep, where it couldn't hurt. The shower was my sanctuary, the one place where the world's noise couldn't follow. Hot water had long since turned lukewarm, but I lingered, letting the steam seep into my skin, softening the edges of a day that had felt too sharp. At 48, I'd grown accustomed to solitude, ever since Richard walked out 3 years ago, taking half my heart and most of my confidence with him. I'd convinced myself that part of my life, the part that craved touch, connection, desire, was over, buried under the weight of divorce papers and small-town whispers. Until that knock. 3 sharp raps at the door, slicing through the patter of water like a blade. I froze, droplets sliding down my shoulders, pooling at my feet. Who could it be? The clock on the bathroom counter blinked 4:17 p.m. Too late for deliveries, too early for the neighborhood kids selling raffle tickets. My pulse quickened, a flutter of unease mingling with curiosity. Laura? A voice, deep, masculine, familiar, cut through the steam. Mark. My neighbor, the one who'd moved into the craftsman-style house across the street 6 months ago. The one whose gaze lingered a heartbeat too long when we passed in the driveway, his hazel eyes catching mine like a hook. The one who'd offered to mow my lawn last summer, shirtless, his skin glistening under the August sun. My breath hitched. Just a minute. I fumbled for the towel hanging on the rack, wrapping it around myself with clumsy hands. The mirror was fogged, but I caught a glimpse of my reflection, flushed cheeks, damp auburn hair clinging to my neck, eyes wide with something I hadn't felt in years, anticipation. Why did this feel dangerous? I padded to the front door, my bare feet leaving wet prints on the hardwood. The towel felt flimsy, barely covering me from chest to thigh. I cracked the door open, just enough to see him. Mark stood there, his broad shoulders filling the frame, blocking the late afternoon sun. His usual easy confidence was gone, replaced by something urgent, almost hungry. His dark hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd run his hands through it one too many times. His flannel shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing a sliver of tanned skin. "Sorry to barge in like this," he murmured, his voice rough, like gravel underfoot. "But I saw your car door was open. Thought you should know." "Oh." My shoulders relaxed, but only slightly. "That's all." But then his gaze flickered downward, just for a heartbeat, and the air between us shifted. His eyes traced the edge of the towel where it clung to my damp skin, and I felt the weight of that look like a touch. A slow, liquid warmth pooled in my stomach, startling in its intensity. He's looking at me, really looking. The towel suddenly felt like tissue paper. "Thanks," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. I gripped the doorframe, my knuckles whitening. "I'll go close it." He didn't move. His eyes darkened, the hazel turning stormy. "Laura?" Just my name, but the way he said it, low, intimate, like a secret meant only for me, sent a shiver racing down my spine. The space between us felt alive, charged with something I couldn't name. Then, a gust of wind swept through the open door, tugging at the towel. I gasped, clutching at it, but not fast enough. The fabric slipped, exposing the curve of my hip, the edge of my thigh. Mark's sharp intake of breath told me he'd seen too much. For one endless second, we just stared at each other, his jaw clenched, a muscle ticking in his cheek. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. "I should go," he said, his voice rougher now, strained. But he didn't move. And I didn't ask him to. The rest of the day passed in a haze, each moment replaying that charged encounter at the door. The way Mark's eyes had darkened when the towel slipped, the way his breath had caught, like he was fighting something primal. It had been so long since a man had looked at me like that, not with pity, not with judgment, but with raw, unfiltered want. So long since I'd wanted to be looked at. By evening, I was restless, pacing my kitchen, the memory of his gaze burning under my skin. I poured myself a glass of Pinot Noir, the ruby liquid catching the light as I swirled it. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that amplifies every thought. I tried to focus on mundane tasks, wiping down the counter, folding laundry, but my mind kept drifting back to him, to the way his voice had wrapped around my name. Another knock at the door startled me, the glass nearly slipping from my hand. I peered through the peephole, my pulse already racing. "Mark?" He stood on my porch, holding a bottle of red wine, his expression a mix of resolve and hesitation. The porch light cast shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp angle of his jaw. I opened the door, self-conscious in my faded jeans and oversized sweater, my hair still damp from the shower. "Mark," I said, my voice betraying a tremor. "What's this?" "A peace offering," he said, holding up the bottle. His voice was warm, but his eyes were careful, searching mine. "For barging in on you earlier." "You didn't have to do that." I hesitated, my fingers tightening on the door. Letting him in felt like stepping onto a tightrope, dangerous, exhilarating. "I wanted to." His gaze flickered over my face, lingering on my lips for a heartbeat too long. I stepped aside, my heart thudding. "Come in." The air crackled as he followed me into the kitchen. He moved with an easy confidence, uncorking the wine with practiced hands. I watched the way his fingers curled around the bottle, the way his forearm flexed under the rolled-up sleeves of his shirt. "Stop it," I scolded myself, but my body wasn't listening. "You're quiet," he murmured, handing me a glass. The brush of his fingers against mine sent a jolt through me. I took a sip, the wine rich and velvety on my tongue, just thinking. "About?" His voice was low, coaxing. "About the way you looked at me earlier. About how much I liked it." I couldn't say that. Instead, I deflected. About how long it's been since I had good company. Mark leaned against the counter, so close I could smell his cologne, something woodsy, with a hint of cedar. I find that hard to believe. I laughed, but it came out shaky, betraying the nerves coiling in my stomach. "Divorce does a number on your social life. Trust me." His expression softened, a flicker of something deeper in his eyes. Richard was an idiot. The mention of my ex-husband's name sent a pang through me, sharp and familiar. Richard had been charming once, until the late nights at the office turned into affairs, until his apologies turned into accusations. Mark must have seen the shadow cross my face, because his hand brushed mine as he took my glass to refill it, his fingers lingering just long enough to make my breath catch. The silence stretched, thick with things unsaid, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant chirp of crickets outside. It all faded, leaving just the two of us, the air heavy with possibility. Then, a crash outside shattered the moment. We both startled. Mark was at the window in 2 strides, his body tense. "Just a raccoon," he said after a moment, but his voice was tight, his shoulders rigid. When he turned back to me, his eyes were different, darker, hungrier, like the crash had stripped away whatever restraint he'd been holding on to. The air between us crackled. I should have stepped away. I should have said goodnight, sent him back across the street. I didn't. The storm rolled in around midnight, a low rumble of thunder shaking the windows. Mark had stayed long after the wine bottle was empty. We'd moved from the kitchen to the living room, where the conversation had turned from polite small talk to something deeper. He'd told me about his life before moving here, a career in construction that had taken him across the country, a marriage that had ended in quiet heartbreak years ago. I'd shared fragments of my own past, Richard's betrayal, the way I'd rebuilt myself piece by piece. Each confession brought us closer, our knees brushing as we sat on the couch, the space between us shrinking with every shared laugh, every lingering glance. Now, rain lashed against the windows, trapping us in the warm glow of my living room. The fire I'd lit earlier crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across his face. "You should stay," I heard myself say, my voice barely audible over the storm, "until it passes." Mark stilled, his gaze locking onto mine. "Laura." His voice carried a question, a warning, a plea. I knew what he was asking, what we were both thinking. The wine hummed in my veins, loosening the knots of fear that had held me back for so long. I stood, closing the distance between us. My hand trembled as I reached up to brush a raindrop from his cheek, his skin warm under my fingertips. The air felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. "I haven't done this in a long time," I whispered, my voice raw with vulnerability. Mark's hand came up to cradle mine, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. "Neither have I." The admission hung between us, heavy with meaning. I saw it in his eyes, the same fear, the same hunger, the same need to be seen. Lightning flashed, illuminating the sharp planes of his face. Thunder rattled the windows, and in that moment, something inside me broke open. I rose onto my toes, my heart pounding. His lips met mine in a kiss that was soft at first, tentative, testing. But when my fingers tangled in his hair, he groaned low in his throat, his hands finding my waist and pulling me flush against him. The kiss deepened, hungry and urgent, tasting of wine and rain and years of pent-up longing. The world narrowed to the feel of his hands sliding up my back, the press of his body against mine, the way my skin came alive under his touch. My body remembered. This, the heat, the want, the rightness of it. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard, our foreheads pressed together. "Tell me to leave," he murmured, his voice rough with need. I didn't. Instead, I took his hand and led him down the hallway, the storm raging outside as we found solace in each other. The first thing I noticed was the smell of coffee, rich and grounding, pulling me from the haze of sleep. Sunlight streamed through my bedroom curtains, painting golden stripes across the hardwood. My body ached in places I'd forgotten could ache, deliciously, gloriously sore. The other side of the bed was warm but empty, the sheets still carrying the faint scent of cedar and him. Last night came rushing back, his hands mapping every curve, my nails scraping down his back, the way we'd fit together like we'd been made for each other. Heat flooded my cheeks, a mix of embarrassment and thrill. The bedroom door creaked open. Mark stood there, shirtless, his dark hair damp from the shower, holding 2 steaming mugs. His smile was tentative, almost boyish, but his eyes held a heat that made my pulse jump. "Morning," he said, his voice a low rasp that sent a shiver through me. "You made coffee?" I croaked, pulling the sheet higher to cover myself, suddenly hyper-aware of my disheveled state, tangled hair, smudged mascara, the faint marks his lips had left on my neck. "Among other things." His gaze darkened as he took me in, lingering on the curve of my shoulder where the sheet had slipped. He set the mugs on the nightstand and sat beside me, the mattress dipping under his weight. His thumb brushed a stray curl from my face, and the tenderness in that gesture undid me more than last night's passion had. For so long, I'd felt invisible, like the world had stopped seeing me after the divorce. But Mark saw me, not just the woman I was now, but the one I'd forgotten how to be. "I should probably go," he murmured, but his fingers trailed down my bare arm, leaving goosebumps in their wake. I caught his hand, my heart racing. "Or you could stay for breakfast." His lips curved into a slow, devastating smile. He leaned in, his kiss tasting of coffee and hope, and I felt something inside me bloom, something I thought had withered long ago. We spent the morning in the kitchen, moving around each other with an ease that felt both new and familiar. He scrambled eggs while I sliced fruit, our elbows brushing, our laughter filling the silence. It was ordinary and extraordinary all at once, like stepping into a life I hadn't dared to imagine. The bakery was a minefield of whispers on Tuesday morning. I stood at the counter, selecting a croissant, trying to ignore the weight of Mrs. Henderson's stare. Her voice carried across the display case, sharp and deliberate. "That's the third time this week Mark Bishop's truck has been at her place past midnight." My fingers tightened around the tongs, the metal biting into my palm, so they've noticed. The bell above the door jingled, and the air shifted. Mark walked in, his presence commanding the room. He didn't hesitate, coming to stand behind me, his chest brushing my back as he reached around me for a coffee. "You forgot this at my place," he murmured, sliding my favorite travel mug into my free hand. Gasps rippled through the shop, a chorus of small-town judgment. I turned in his arms, meeting his smirk with raised eyebrows. "You did that on purpose." His fingers found mine, warm and steady. "Let them talk," he said, loud enough for the room to hear. The whispers followed us out the door, but with his hand in mine, they felt like background noise. We walked to the park, where the autumn leaves crunched underfoot, and he told me about the town's history of gossip, how it had driven his sister away years ago, how he'd learned to ignore it. I told him about the years after Richard, the way the town had pitied me, then forgotten me. "They'll get used to us," he said, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. I wanted to believe him, but the weight of their stares lingered, a reminder that some battles weren't fought just between two people. The letter arrived on blue legal paper, the kind that carried bad news. "I'm contesting the house sale. Heard you've been distracted." Richard's handwriting was as cold as his words, each letter a jab at the life I'd built without him. The house, my sanctuary, the one thing I'd fought to keep in the divorce, was under threat again. I sat at the kitchen table, the page crumpled in my fist, tears burning my eyes. After all these years, he still knew how to gut me. Strong arms wrapped around me from behind. Mark's lips pressed against my temple as he read over my shoulder. "Let him try," he growled, his voice thick with quiet fury. He turned me to face him, his eyes blazing. "You think I'd let anyone take what's yours?" In that moment, I saw it, our future, his battles becoming mine, my scars becoming his to kiss better. He wasn't just offering comfort, he was offering a partnership, a shared fight. The last of my walls crumbled. When his mouth claimed mine, it tasted like victory, like the promise of a life where I didn't have to face the storms alone. We hired a lawyer the next day, a sharp woman from the next town over who promised to bury Richard's claim in paperwork. Mark sat beside me through every meeting, his hand a steady anchor on my knee. 1 year later, the town still whispers. They whisper when Mark's truck stays parked in my driveway every night, its familiar bulk a fixture in the neighborhood. They whisper when we walk into the bakery together, his hand permanently glued to the small of my back, his thumb brushing lazy circles that make my skin hum. They whisper when he kisses me senseless against my mailbox in broad daylight, his laughter warm against my lips. Let them. The house is mine, the legal battle won months ago. Richard's letter is a distant memory, burned in the fireplace one chilly evening as Mark held me close. The town's gossip has softened, more curious than cruel now, but I don't care either way. Every morning, I wake up wrapped in those strong arms, his breath warm against my neck. I trace the scars our pasts left behind, his from a marriage that taught him caution, mine from a betrayal that taught me strength. Together, we've built something new, something unshakable. I smile at the woman I was a year ago, the one who hesitated to open the door in nothing but a towel. She was brave in ways I didn't understand then, stepping into the unknown with a racing heart. Mark stirs beside me, his hand finding mine under the sheets. "Morning," he murmurs, his voice rough with sleep. I kiss him, slow and sure, tasting the future. And I know, without a doubt, that I'd answer that knock all over again. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to the channel as it helps us to bring more stories around the world.